Greetings, everyone. My name is Peter Young. I'm a member of the Committee 100, and I happen to be chair of this Asian American Career Ceilings program, which started about 3.5, 4 years ago. And this is, I think, our 46th event, which is a combination of panels, summits, uh, uh, idea generation sessions, et cetera. And this is part of a new series that started in December, which is a master class. In other words, rather than just people talking about the research was done and so forth, we pick some topic around a skill set or something that is very important for people to succeed in the context of a career ceilings. So like today is networking, because networking probably comes up the most as the tool that is probably the most important in terms of being able to be successful generally, but also, to break through the career ceiling. The last thing I want to say is there are two events coming up that I want you to be aware of. One is on June 24th, we're going to have a uh, technology career panel and advisory session, which is unique, where we'll have some people who are in technology who could talk about careers, and then it becomes a virtual session where you can sit in at different tables of different people with different backgrounds and get career advice. It's a very exciting kind of thing. We've done it before. It works quite well, but this one's going to be focused on technology. The other is a new program, Committee 100, which is Committee 100 Conversations, uh, Recollections, Pioneers, and Heroes, which will feature fireside chats with people who can talk about their pioneering activity in terms of either related to Chinese Americans, Asian Americans helping this country, whether it's in science or in business or otherwise. So the first one will be actually June 11th, and we've decided to feature two of the original founders of Committee 100 who will talk about how it was founded, what was the motivation, and what Committee 100 has been able to do over the last 36 years. The last thing I want to say is just a technical thing, and that is the way you ask questions is there's a Q&A chat box, and you should, there are three questions already been typed in. That's the vehicle by which you can pose questions. The three panelists, the moderator and the panelists, will be able to see the questions. Allister Chan, who is the moderator, will in fact choose which questions to address. The general chat box is disabled because it's too disruptive to have people in the audience so we're chatting with each other. So we've disabled that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Allister Chan. He is a director at Citigroup, and also he is a member, for better or worse, of the Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceilings Planning Committee, which I don't know whether it's good or bad, Allister, but he's been working the last couple of years on these programs. So with that, let me turn it over to Allister.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter. We're super excited to be here with you this evening, and for those of you perhaps on the West Coast or abroad, good afternoon. And so, thank you again. So, I think the panel that we've established here to address the topic of how to build your personal network, including through strategic allies, we find to be an incredibly important professional developmental tool that is incredibly important for us in terms of building our either personal brand, our community, our professional network, and ultimately our careers. And so, with that in mind, I'd love to do a brief introduction of our panelists here, where we have Joy Chen. So, she's had a background in public office. She was an author and an executive search executive. And currently, she serves as the CEO of the Multicultural Leadership Institute, where she does an incredible amount of work in terms of giving back to the community, of helping build folks' careers. And we also have Brian Pang. He was a former executive at Electronic Arts, And currently, he's involved in being the head of partnerships at Stand with Asian Americans. So I'd say that these two individuals will provide us with some super helpful perspectives as it relates to networking, given their career paths and all that they're doing currently in terms of giving back to the community. So with that, I'd love to pass it on to our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves. But seeing as though we have the topic of building our personal network, I'd love for our panelists to give us some perspective as it relates to how networking has supported your career. Perhaps, ladies first, if I could ask Joy to provide a brief intro and try to address that question.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much to Peter and to Allister and to C100 and to all of you for joining us. I think that this question of networking is not only important, but it's also really fascinating. For me personally, I'm a former shy misfit. I grew up as the child of immigrants in Maryland. But since then, I have worked as deputy mayor of Los Angeles. I was appointed at age 31. And then, as Allister said, I was an executive recruiter. So I helped Fortune 500 companies find CEOs and board members. So I got to see all of these questions from the other perspective of who gets chosen and how do we choose leaders. Following that, I wrote a leadership blog, which went viral in China. And that took me to China. I was asked to write a book. I wrote a book for women in Chinese called 30岁前别结婚, Do Not Marry Before Age 30. I wrote it in English. It was translated. And I spent 9 years in China, where networking happens in a totally different way. So I'm excited to talk really about cultures and how culture impacts the way that we network. With the pandemic, I returned to the States and I founded the Multicultural Leadership Institute, where I focus on cross-cultural leadership training. I do a lot of community work. You all might have read my recent Harvard Business Review article specifically about Asians and networking and how we can move Asians up through the glass ceiling. The last thing I would just say is that by now, I've worked at the top of 3 industries on 3 continents, and I never applied for a job. All of that, all of my career, all of these positions came through networking. In fact, when the Los Angeles Times profiled me, the title was simply The Networker. Over to you, Brian.
Wow. Thank you, Joy. That's a really tough intro to follow, but I'll do my best. Do want to start by thanking as well to Peter, Allister, and Joy, and really all of you in the audience for being here with us today. So happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month and also Mental Health Awareness Month. So to follow Joy, I was an immigrant. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong. And I always grew up with that mindset of, just get the work done, keep your head down, work hard, someone will recognize you, and all the good things will follow. But I think a lot of us here on this call will already know this. That formula doesn't always work in North America and in a lot of other Western societies. And so I've had the good fortune, as in Allister's introduction, I've had the good fortune of working for a global company, Electronic Arts, where I've had to lead and partner with a lot of large teams. And I've been able to really break out of that mindset. And through my work, and also then I've branched out into community work, and now I lead several different nonprofits. I'm also head of partnerships for one of them, as Allister mentioned, as well as a few others. I've been able to really tap into the power of networking and understand how networking can benefit the organizations, but also wider communities. And so the topic of strategic allyship is really key, especially in this moment, especially with things like AI and divisive rhetoric, a lot of things that are happening in the world that really reinforce the need for networking and relationships. So I'm more than excited to be here today and to share my experiences with you all.
Thanks so much, Brian and Joy. And so, when it comes down to networking or just generally the term or verb in itself, there might be a negative connotation associated with it at times. Like, how an individual might be a little too networky, or, you attend a caucasian that has some past hors d'oeuvres, and then it's like titled as a networking session. And sometimes it's like, is it a cocktail hour, or what are you supposed to be doing then? So, Joy, Brian, so how should we, at least for the context, for everyone here, define what is networking and why is it so important?
I think that sometimes if we grow up in different types of cultures, there's a sliminess or a sleaziness that is associated with networking. I would just say that if you think about your human capital or your career as having two major components, first is personal capital. That's what many of us have been taught to really focus on: getting good education, working hard. That would all be your personal skills, your experience, your hard work, dedication. If that's personal capital, then network capital is what turbocharges all of that. Network capital is what allows you to turn human capital into growth and impact. Because in this world, nothing is achieved by one person alone, right? So to me, network capital encompasses all the relationships that you need to activate your personal capital into growth and impact. So I would not associate it narrowly with standing around awkwardly at the hors d'oeuvre table. I would look at it in a more expansive way as rocket fuel for your career. The other thing that I would say about networking, though, is that there is, when we talk about network capital, there is a rich get richer while the poor get poorer aspect to network capital. So if you've got a lot of network capital, you've been in politics, you've been whatever, then you know a lot of people, then it just tends to be like lifting you up constantly. If you don't have a lot of network capital, then there is also this poor get poorer. And I think that, based on all of our research, based on my Harvard Business Review article, that is specifically network capital, where the poor get poorer is where it was really what holds up many, many Asians, right? That Asians are the best educated, have the highest personal capital, but the lowest network capital. And that is a career killer for too many in our community.
Love it. Brian?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Joy. It's definitely rocket fuel for our careers, but also in life in general. Everyone knows this. But the act of networking is so critical. It enables us to build relationships with people who then become our support systems. They provide us with access and open doors for us. Again, in business and life, examples would be things like access to capital, to suppliers or partners, staff even, and just champions of us. And especially these days, there's a phenomenon in business called the network effect. And a lot of businesses rely on the network effect, and you have to build and cultivate that. I can talk more about that later. But at the end of the day, your network is essentially, to break it down, it's your net that catches opportunities for you. And so the bigger your net, the more people you know, the deeper your connections, the bigger and stronger your net is. And the bigger your net is, the more opportunities you can catch, right? It's not just a proverb, it's backed up by evidence, right? Studies have found that having a wide network of contacts is a key factor in success. And so, if I think of the most successful people in the world and in economies and businesses, they all have a lot of people that support them, provide them with the resources, help them get the right connections, and open the doors. So, it's something you should really invest in if you want to succeed, is build those networking skills. Doors open for you, you open doors for others, and society just gets better as a result. So I can't stress enough, cast that net.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Network capital is rocket fuel for human capital, and networking is the net that catches opportunities for you. No, I love that. So not to try to frame anything in the negative sense, but I think it's always important for us to be self-aware
Yeah.
of where we need to or what we need to ultimately work on, right? And so, Joy, Brian, can you give us some ideas of what at least generally you've seen as some common mistakes of Asian American professionals when it comes down to trying to network or seek allies, and perhaps like some ideas of how they can be avoided?
Sure. I think that there's two major things that get in the way of us. One would be cultural differences, and the other would be stereotypes. On the cultural differences, many of us were raised. I mean, the thing to understand about Western business culture is it's a very specific, it's not like the way of leadership. Western business culture is based on Western societies, and Western societies are at the extreme end of all human societies on one trait, individualism. And Western societies now, according to anthropologists, are more individualistic than any other society on Earth right now, or that have ever been on Earth. And that individualism leads to a certain set of traits that are valued in corporate America, right? This is where you have the assertiveness, the speaking up, but the networking is also part of it. That the individualistic societies prioritize these very ephemeral relationships that you can just come and leave out of them very fluidly. Whereas many of us were brought up in very collectivist societies where it takes a long time, it takes years to make relationships. If you go to China, people are doing business with people they went to college with 20 years ago, and they don't just, immediately jump into new relationships as quickly. So that's just one thing that many of us were maybe not brought up in this hyper individualistic, hyper aggressive, sort of assertive type networking. So I think part of this, as you said, Allister, is to be aware that the way that our natural tendencies are culturally influenced. So just to be aware that, oh, these are the behaviors that are super prioritized here. And I think that just understanding that will help us get past, when I do this training, I train at so many large companies on leadership training. I train a lot of Asians, a lot of Asian ERGs, and a lot of this comes down to the biggest objection that I hear is, but that's just not me, right? It's like, oh, I can go to networking, I can try networking, but it makes me feel so slimy, or I can promote myself, but it just feels so sleazy. So I think that to get past this, that's just not me. I think part of it is just being really aware of what it takes to be successful, and then making small adjustments, not huge adjustments, but small adjustments. And think about not just like doing the uncomfortable thing, but expanding our comfort zone. That is a mindset shift, right? Not a behavioral shift. Say, okay, I'm getting greater awareness of what it takes to be successful. I'm going to expand my comfort zone a little bit and step within that, so that, to me, our goal is on the culture stuff is to be both effective and authentic and not feel that tug of war.
That's great.
I'll have a couple things to that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alistair.
Oh no, please, Brian. Oh, love your perspective too.
Thank you. Yeah, Joy definitely hit a lot of the key points. I only have two small ads here. One thing I've noticed is a lot of networking opportunities. During networking opportunities, people really focus on quantity instead of quality. And so it's a tendency that I've seen not just within Asians, but a lot of people will come into a space and try to meet as many people as possible. And there's that concept of the business card exchange, and people come up with their stacks of business cards and just try to dole them out as fast as possible. I would recommend not doing that. It's more important to go deeper in your interactions and not necessarily focus as much on quantity. And that leads me to the next point is there's a concept of, we've probably all heard this, is try to be genuine when you're interacting with people and networking. But to unpack that a little bit is, in another way, it's also to not be as transactional. So to me, it's really understanding what value you're bringing into an interaction. and also what the other party in an interaction would want, and try to deliver that. If you're in it for yourself and you're going in with a very set objective to dole out as many business cards as possible and focus on quantity, a lot of people see right through that, and they just feel like they're one of many, and they're not really sure what you're looking for and how to help you. So I'll go
But they
deeper
don't
into
want to
this.
help you.
Right, or exactly, they may not even want to help. But definitely we'll go deeper into these types of notions here. But I can't stress enough, I think the things that I've seen not go well is when we're not as genuine as we could be. And part of that is also just focusing on quantity and not quality.
So that's great. And so, our topic today is with respect to like building our personal network, but also strategic allies, right? So to just like lay out the framework early on, here's how would you define a strategic ally, and maybe what's different between a strategic ally and just your network?
So I think that one thing to remember, especially now, especially during the pandemic, we saw the anti-Asian hate, and I think many of us became very concerned about our community, and I think, and also just even stepping out on the street, our personal safety. But I think it's also important to recognize that even through all of that, over 70% of Americans say that Asian Americans are net positive to our community, and they want to get to know Asian Americans better, right? So we have a lot of potential allies out there. Allister, you asked about strategic allies. I'm going to start with talking about potential allies. So there are people who are not going to be open to your overtures or wanting to be friends or colleagues, and that's cool. But let's play the odds. Maybe you meet that one in the three, but let's then, I would just say, quickly move on and try to meet others who are potential allies, who you can activate to be strategic allies. To me, a strategic ally is somebody who you can benefit them and they can benefit you. If it goes too much in one direction, like Brian said, are you going to be helpful to them? Because if they're not going to be spending too much time thinking about how they can be helpful to you either, right? So to me, a strategic ally is someone that you can co-create success with. Because we're not just here to build our own story, right? We're here to build everyone's story and their stories. And so it's a matter of figuring out who we can co-create success with and building and investing in those relationships.
Not much else to add to that. Definitely it's an agreement. An allyship is an agreement between two groups or parties to really benefit each other. And some of the examples here are around sharing resources or knowledge or opportunities. Some tangible examples would be like mentor-mentees, social media pods, founder circles, hype crews. Those are just some examples of strategic alliances.
Yeah, that's super helpful to think through some of those examples, because at the end of the day, I think those, if you want to say, community groups opportunities exist, and I think it's just helpful for the audience and all of us to try to remember those opportunities that definitely do exist around us. And so I think it's all about finding them and tapping into them best as we can. So
Can I talk
let's think
about the strategic allies, though? I would
please.
also encourage people to think about strategic allies that bring different resources to the table than we do. Because I also feel like, I talk to a lot of people, over 80% of Asian employees and companies lack belonging. That's incredibly sad. That's 4 out of 5. People go to work and they don't feel belonging. That's just, that is such a miss for companies as well as for Asians. And I feel like Asian ERGs can play a very important role in creating that belonging, and you can find allies there. But I think it's also important to think about how we can build relationships outside of our ERGs. Because, there aren't that many Asians at the top. right? And I often hear people say things like, Joy, I just need a champion. When I say, well, what do you think is the biggest barrier? I just need a champion, but there's no Asians at the top, or there's too few Asians at the top, so I can't find someone to champion me. And so the facts are the facts. There aren't that many Asians at the top. And so we need to learn to build strategic alliances with people who are not Asian, who have different resources to bring to the table. Because most people with the resources in our companies are not Asian. So I would say build strategic alliances that are not narrow, but that are broad. And Brian said that bigger is not better. I would say bigger is not better, broader is better.
And we can also lean on our strengths. I love what you said, Joy, because I think our non-Asian allies have a lot to learn and benefit from us. And so, we have a lot of superpowers that we need to leverage more. And I also think we need to showcase them more and have our allies learn about those as well. Because we have really, really great qualities that would definitely benefit other allies, other ethnic groups, other cohorts in business and in life.
I want to build on that because I just moved back into my house. This is my house, this is my home office. I just moved back in last weekend from the Eaton fire. So I live in Altadena, which you might have heard of. Nobody ever heard of it before January 7th, but there was a unprecedented fire in my community. And I happened at the time to be the admin of the pickleball WhatsApp of the Altadena Country Club, which was not a very important role. But the afternoon of the fire, everything changed for us. And that WhatsApp became our emergency evacuation network because the official evacuation warnings came too late. And 18 people of my neighbors died, but none of us died because of the WhatsApp. And since then, I've continued to lead this group of fire survivors. And we've now outgrown WhatsApp. We now have 2,000 families on Discord. And I'm still leading this as a volunteer. I never expected to have this kind of a volunteer role in my community, but it's become really a lifeline for the community. And I've been thinking about my being Chinese, and people have been saying like, God, you're such a remarkable leader of this group. Wherever I go to the grocery store, in the media, ABC's going to profile me. Some other organizations, media are going to profile me. And they're like, this is remarkable leadership. And I've been thinking that actually being Chinese has been an important part of what prepared me to lead this community, because nurturing a group of people in crisis is not about being the loudest in the room, right? It's about figuring out what this community needs and getting them the resources, leveraging. We just unlocked $38 million from State Farm in insurance payouts due to our pressure, and figuring out what are the needs and how to get it to them. And I think when Brian says we Asians have superpowers, I think that is absolutely true. I think that it's not just what I've written about Harvard Business Review and this and that, about unlock the leadership potential of Asians. Asians bring a different set of leadership skills that often are exactly what's needed. So thank you, Brian, for bringing this up, that we have superpowers. So let's not always just try to be like the junior white person. That's not the goal here. The goal is to learn to be effective in the broader society so that we can leverage what's unique about us.
I really love these tidbits, and I'd say that being a pickleball WhatsApp chat admin has its importance clearly. Where not to be like facetious or comical about it, but I truly do believe in terms of being a net positive contributor to your immediate community, it has then tangential relations to again this topic of building your network, right? And I think like Joy, you added in terms of your intro is that most of your, if you want to say professional positions, never came from submitting your resume through a job application
Never.
on some either mailing in or emailing or anything like that. It's through your network, right? So with that, Curious if you can provide some tidbits and strategies as it relates to what are some effective strategies when it comes down to effective networking, right? So I think there are different perspectives around how we best go about doing it. I love some of the tidbits like broader is better, building allies. But if you can probably give maybe like top 3 strategies that relates to effective networking.
There's actually a lot of research. I led this morning, over 12 hours ago at 5 o'clock in the morning, my time, I led a global training for Dow on strategic networking. And we talked about this very interesting research out there on boundary spanners. So basically, organizational network analysis. I'm going to just pop this for my training. Am I able? Oh, you know what? I can't show, forget it. So basically, if we think about, there are organizational psychologists that analyze company networks and say, who are the most powerful people? Who are the least powerful people? So if you imagine like a bunch of dots who are people, and then the people in the middle have the most power because they have the most rich ties. These are the emotionally rich ties. And what happens is the people who are on the outside that have very few lines touching them, they're called peripherals because they may have people exchanging information with them, but they lack the emotionally rich ties that create connection and belonging. Well, Asians tend to be peripherals in a network. That's why we lack belonging, right? Belonging is just the emotional experience of having poor networks. And so when you look at the people who have a lot of ties, if you look at the people who have a lot of ties, it's very interesting. Some of them are called connectors. So basically in a group, the central connectors, they have a lot of rich ties within that group. They're like, they dominate the HR function, or they dominate, it could be a social group. But the people who are the most powerful people in the network, the people who have the best careers, the people who gain access to the best opportunities are called boundary spanners. Okay, so these are the people that sit in the middle of multiple social groups or multiple functions within a company, boundary spanners. So, when we said earlier that broader is better, that's now we're diving deeper into that. So the question is, how can we position ourselves to touch multiple different groups, right? I had said earlier, don't just hang out with the Asians. But, as you said, being a pickleball admin is not really a bad thing. You might think it's pretty lowly job. It's a pretty lowly job. But you get exposure to a lot of different people, right? And they're constantly asking you when they need a little help. You can be a little helpful to a lot of people. And in my 20s, when I did not know a single soul in LA, and I was really shy, and I had no network at all, I was volunteering all the time. Things like admin of a pickleball, that's nothing, but, volunteering at soup kitchens, volunteering on every single Democratic campaign there was. And what that did was, it made me much more comfortable. It gave me a lot of practice in small interactions, but it also built me a very broad network. And I would say that outside of my work, through my 20s, when nobody at work would recognize my leadership skills or my leadership potential, nobody would give me a promotion. I was getting promotions into these volunteer jobs. I would start off arranging chairs, and then I would be on a committee, and then I get on a board, like very unimportant boards. But these are all, I would say, just to boil it down, think about being a boundary spanner. Boundary spanners get get the most opportunities. They drive the most innovation. They become broadest in their experiences. They're the most powerful people in an organization. And you can think about how to volunteer in your community or in your company as a great way to boundary span.
I love that. And curious, like Brian, like from given your experience, what do you see as some perspectives as it relates to good strategies for more effective networking?
Yeah, definitely. I love everything Joy said, and Joy and I know each other from before too. So this is almost like a walk down memory lane in some cases. Joy is definitely a boundary spanner. And so to answer that question for me, it's to add to what Joy said, it's really about genuinely knowing and caring about other people. Because to be a good networker, you have to, it's an act of love. So knowing how to interact with people, helping people through what they need and want, to me, those are acts of love. So it's important to me to always be helpful and offer value to others. So always have this value add and giving mindset. And by the way, if you give, the universe will give back to you. So one of my favorite questions when I'm talking to people is I will ask, how can I help you? And we just don't do that enough in a lot of our communities and spaces. A lot of us think about how can others help us and how can we take, but have that giving mindset. The only other thing I would add is there's a famous Maya Angelou quote, which says, she says, people don't remember what you said or what you did. They remember how you made them feel. So a good tip of advice here is to just focus on making people feel that they belong, and that will propel you into that boundary spanner echelon that Joy's talking about. It'll give you a lot of relationship capital.
And I feel like this is very counterintuitive for the way that many of us were brought up. I think that for many of us, we're taught to like focus on hard metrics, like getting good grades, getting into Harvard, doing whatever, getting our kids into Harvard. And so we're always really focused on heads down, focus on the work, and focus less on emotion. Part of it is also because we might be brought up to express emotion differently. We might be expressed in Chinese, like to basically hold our emotions in, because that's what strength is. But in Western societies, emotional expressiveness is what's really valued. If you look at the organizational psychology literature on the number one thing that boundary spanners do, it is something that they call energize. And I think it's what Brian is describing. They emit contagious positive energy. So they're like the sun. When you're with them, you feel warm and you feel belonging. This is completely about emotions, right? This has nothing to do with content. And I think that sometimes, when I was growing up, when I was early in my career, I think like, God, some people like that person, it's not that impressive. That person's not that smart. It's not the smartest person in the room, but how come they get all the, good jobs or, great opportunities? A lot of it has to do with this idea of energizing. Now, people sometimes ask me then, well, I'm an introvert, so how can I be an energizer? So this has, in fact, whether or not introverts, researchers find, can be just as energizing as extroverts, right? Because this isn't about being high energy. This is about the energy that you give to others. Like Brian says, it's like a gift, right? You make them feel energized and good. So then people want to be with you. And people want to work with you. So when they need somebody to do something cool and important, they'll come to you.
Can I
I
add
love
to that?
that. Yeah, please, Brian, please.
This is a great track. Thank you, Joy. Because going back to the superpower conversation too, and I do agree that a lot of this is not inherent to our East Asian cultures. However, I do think that we do have a superpower when we're networking and operating as leaders, because we think of collective rather than individual. And so when I'm in a space where I have an opportunity to be in a group, networking and interacting, or in a leadership opportunity, I tend to think of the collective. And I feel like we have a sea of people, as Joy also touched on, a sea of people and leaders who dominate conversations, discussions. A lot of people pump their chests and talk about their individual accomplishments, pound the tables. But what I tend to do is I like to bring in more opinions. I open up circles physically to include those on the peripheral. And I try my best to steer discussions towards how the team and collective can benefit. So I feel like those are superpowers that we have. We just tap into those more.
Excellent.
No, I love that. And so not to throw it on the dime here, but appreciate we have these superpowers, but there's arguably always the two sides to the coin here, right? Where all the superpowers that we have that we've discussed, insofar as thinking about the collective, being a team player in that regard, let's say being a contributor to the collective good. Let's say there is at times the perception of, or the stereotype, if you will, of there being the competent Asian American professional that is a great executor, contributor to the team, but they are not necessarily seen as a leader.
Mhm.
So, with respect to, let's say, in the context of networking, what are some, if you want to call it like recommendations, tips, or stylistic ways of networking or interacting with other individuals that you may recommend?
Maybe I can take it in a slightly different direction and not about stylistic, but I think that there are always things, and this is also related to, thank you, Rachel, this question that you asked about how did you actually go to someone who could promote you? And I think that the way it's always worked for me is that I've seen something that needed to be done and I just started to do it. And I think that we can do that in a volunteer capacity. We could do it at work, because as you said, Allister, we are stereotyped as, good worker bees, but poor leaders. So we might not get that tap on the shoulder to be a leader. But if there's, you notice like you have deep knowledge of where the company is going, what the higher ups need, what your boss's personal priorities are. You find a way to make your boss look good. You find like some white space that needs to be done, and you can just get up and take the initiative and do it. So I think that there are ways that we can take on leadership responsibilities when we're not the leader yet, and we prove to other people our leadership. I mean, just to talk about this fire, this crazy fire situation. I mean, the WhatsApp didn't have to become this 2,000 person Discord. I just kept on pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, right? And nobody appointed me. There are many other, whatever neighborhood street WhatsApps that could have become this, and then they didn't. So sometimes there are opportunities, and I think that there are opportunities all around us that I found in my volunteering. All of my volunteering, I've been volunteering has powered my career for the last 30 years. When I say nobody's appointed me, I kind of started appointing myself, but I didn't get appointed to like the big roles, like to be deputy mayor. I would be appointing myself to do things like right now leading this, 2,000 person community. But then all those people are seeing me. And in all of these cases, it was like somebody who would see my work here would have this other amazing job and be like, hey, I think I know the perfect person for that. I mean, me. Not because somebody ever appointed me to do all those jobs to prove it. I just proved it. Right. And I think that's the way it's always worked for me. And it's almost more genuine. And so that's to answer your question. How did you go to someone who could promote you? I never did. People always, and isn't it always nicer to be asked, to be invited rather than to push yourself? Yes. We're women, we're Chinese, we don't want to be pushing ourselves. So it is nice to be like, when you are proactively serving the world, creating enormous value in the world, you generate pull for new opportunities if you're creating huge value in a visible way.
I love that. And I think that there's a
And my
consistent theme
book I
here.
wrote, I have 2 books in Chinese, but in English I wrote Generate Pull to Shape Serendipity. Right? We're generating pull to shape serendipity for your own life and also for all those that you're adding value to. The key is to always be adding value. That's more important than I think any like stylistic thing or any like small behaviors at the networking reception. How can you create deep value at your company and in your community?
I love that. I agree with the value 100%. And the other piece is, I mentioned this earlier, but really love people and love the person you're interacting with. To build on that, it's really to know what would help them, what they want from you, and provide it before they even ask. And part of that is, so George brought up the example of know what your executives or leaders might want. One micro tip I would say is if you're in a business setting, have just some factoids about your industry or your business, your profession. You know, if you're a business owner, your business exists to solve a distinct problem, right? Or if you work in a corporation, your corporation exists to solve a problem. So, you know, that in itself is interesting. Talk about that. Be interesting. So just make sure you do cool things and showcase it. Have hobbies. You know, if you play sports, talk about sports. If you do something that other people might find interesting, talk about that, and add value in that way as well. So, and especially in business settings, people don't always want to hear about work or talk about their work. You know, be varied with what you're talking about and what you're bringing into the interaction.
That's great. And when I say add value, it's not always like add monster value every day, but I would say that if you are out there finding ways to add little value, that suddenly there may be opportunities that open themselves up to you to add more value, and also make it fun for yourself. You know, find things that you like to do that can be valuable to others.
This is so great. I think like I love that, and how we've, if you want to call it, pivoted the theme of networking into how we can actually be of service to others and
Yes.
creating value for others, right?
Yes.
Because fundamentally, it is not necessarily purely as like Joy would describe, and the way I pose the question is the stylistic approach of how you're networking with others. But really, I think fundamentally, I think of it as the consistent theme here is that we're all human beings, we're all people. I think in general, people like interacting with other interesting people that create value for them. And that level of value that is created can be as simple as positive energy, right? It could be your interests. And it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate, if you want to say, how you are as a person in those small engagements with others, in those, in quote, networking sessions, cocktail hour sessions that you have available to you, either through work or through any organizations that you're part of, or like a happy hour session, right? It spans a lot of different opportunities that we all have in our day-to-day lives of building that network, right? And so curious, like in general, just in terms of trying to at least have like more tidbits for the attendees today, is that once like you're in the opportunity of like networking, or once you've established a network, do you have any perspective as it relates to how you elevate just any one individual in that network to becoming that strategic ally? Is there something in particular that you think that needs to be done, or is it just something that kind of happens organically? Love to get your perspective on that.
I think it has a lot to do with what you want to do. Like, how do you want to add value or make impact or grow your career in the next 3 to 6 months? Who do you need to co-create success with to do that? And then it's, going to coffee with them, getting to know them better, or just, sending them an email and say, hey, let's have a Zoom coffee and chat about this. So to me, it's kind of based on what I need. But, I think coming from politics, because I started out pretty young in politics, all through my 20s and early to mid 30s. In politics, if you are good in politics, then you get very used to immediately thinking about somebody. Oh, what do they want? What do I want? Where's the overlap? Because that's, to me, that's what strategic networking is. Where's that overlap? and identifying it quickly and staying right there.
And is you creating value for others that you know, a la those that are in your network. So, love that.
Yeah, because I mean, the best way to network is to be doing something meaningful with somebody, right? That's why volunteering is so powerful. It's like something that you care about, they care about, and we're working together on something, rather than just standing around talking about football or, trying to make small talk. To me, I think the making small talk, it's just been, less and less interesting over the years, and never interesting. Even when I was younger, I was always just busy trying to do something interesting or valuable, or play pickleball, or standing
Exactly.
around, eating hors d'oeuvres just never is that interesting.
No, it's perfect. No, I love this because I think and actually as we kind of come up on 10 minutes left and we have some questions in the Q&A, I think but to Joy's comment there, I think insofar as the typical ickiness that comes with the association of networking, I think that networking really has hopefully like through this session, we're providing a different perspective as to how we could or should be looking at networking, really, the mindset that we have in terms of any engagement that we have with other people, just generally speaking, in a formal networking session or just in regular way, day-to-day interactions with people in our community, either at work or in our pickleball WhatsApp chats. So, so with that, I think so we have some great questions here. I think some of the attendees have some questions that are quite specific and would love Joy or Brian's perspective on. And so maybe as a starting point, so could you give more details around how you could be more genuine or less transactional if you're at a networking event?
Brian?
I can,
I never
yeah,
go
so
to events. Brian goes to events. I always see on my LinkedIn, he's in this smashing tux, looking amazing, this and that, and this and that. I don't do any of that. So Brian's gonna have to take this one.
oh my gosh. Well, I think Joy, if Joy went to an event, she would instantly be swarmed. So you're smart. People come to Joy, not the other way
No.
around. But to answer the question, I would say just be very open to finding inspiration from every interaction. One of my most memorable experiences in networking is I was talking to my former company's CEO, Fortune 500 CEO. I was a senior leader at the time, and we were in a big room with hundreds of people in there, and he just locked in on me. We had this great talk for several minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and he made me feel like I was the only person in that room. He made me the center of his attention, and I felt important. And ever since that interaction, he always remembered me by name every time he saw me. Mind you, we didn't work in the same city, but whenever he saw me, he always greeted me by name. He remembered. And so those are very important things for me in terms of just being genuine. Um, Another way to be genuine is, and Joy talked a lot about small talk and some of it's very kind of blasé nowadays. One thing to maybe a micro tip, but one thing I would recommend is ask some non-traditional questions. So instead of saying, "Oh, how's your day going?" Talk about things like, what have you recently accomplished lately, or what is something you've done recently that you've never done before. And then again, I mentioned my favorite question is, how can I help you? So imagine if you're in an elevator with someone, a very high position of power, having these thought-provoking questions will break them out of their traditional mindset and would actually help them remember you more and be willing to have more of a conversation with you. So I think those are just my micro tips on how to be genuine.
Great. Another question here. So beyond networking and introductions, what advice would you give on maintaining your personal networks? So do you send cards, reach out via email, LinkedIn, coffee chats, lunches? So there are a lot of different ways to do it these days, but like curious, like Brian, perhaps to direct it at you, seeing as though you attend a number of events, like Joy mentioned, is like how do you manage all these folks that you're meeting through all these events?
Thank you, Allister. Joy, I definitely want to hear your answers to this after mine. And Allister would love to hear yours too, because you're also a great networker. But for my answer, so there is a Chinese proverb, very relevant. The Chinese proverb is the best time to plant a tree is yesterday, and the next best time to plant a tree is now. So what that means is to check in on your friends before you want or need something from them. And Allister, you gave a whole series of examples of how to check in and reach out. All of the above. Write them a note, write them an email, send them a text if you have their number, DM them on social media, add a comment on their social media posts. But just interact with them so that when you do want something, it's not like a cold contact. For me in general, I do try to help as many people as possible. I am getting better, very backed up, unfortunately, but I do try to help as many people as possible. And I do tend to naturally prioritize those who I've had regular contact with and have more relationship capital with, versus someone who just reaches out to me when they need something. I don't tend to prioritize those requests as high. So I'd say, remember to plant that tree now, or if you can, yesterday.
Yeah. On the question of how do I maintain my network, I don't really do those things. I don't really send regular notes. I see sometimes people advise like send a note every year on their birthday. I mean, that'd be cool. Or, have a rotation in your calendar of like all your contacts and constantly be contacting them. I don't do those things. If they pop up in my LinkedIn, or I actually haven't been spending that much time on LinkedIn or Facebook. I know I probably should get back and spend more. I've just been so busy. I might, if it pops up and like, oh, congratulations, or this looks good. But I think that for me, at least personally, if I had good interactions with them before, especially like if I've volunteered with them or something before, like right now with the fire survivors, I needed to get, I bumped into somebody I hadn't seen in 20 years, Jeff Prang, who's now the LA County assessor. He's like a big public official, but he used to be a West Hollywood City Council member when I was a deputy mayor. We hadn't seen each other in 20 years, but it was like, oh, hi, how you doing? He's doing something good. I'm doing something good for the community. And it was like 20 years had gone by. And then, I said, hey, Jeff, I want you to come on and, I'd like to interview you on Zoom for my community. He's like, oh, fantastic. So I think that if they're, I guess at least in my experience, if you've always been trying to add value and you find somebody that you've added value with before, or they kind of know you around through that, and you see them 20 years later, you can just pick up. So I don't really, I've met too many people. I've interviewed 4,000 CEOs, of Fortune 500 companies. I can't possibly be in touch with them all. So I don't do that regular thing. The other thing is that your lives change, your careers change. And I know that people are saying, doesn't it seem a little bit transactional? Transactional is in a bad way. I don't really see this as transactional. I see this as co-creating success. So you're not looking for people only when you need help. You're reaching out to people only when you know that you can do something to be successful that also benefits them. So that is not transactional. That's partnering.
I love that. And we just have like 2 minutes left here, but just at least insofar as like my response to that, I think it would just be a commonality, where I think that in terms of in all my interactions, I try to find commonality that I have with others, or that others, whatever they express, that may have commonality with myself. And so that's where it's a delicate balance of not necessarily trying to be overly broad in terms of my interests, but I do have my interests and passions, and I try to find that commonality with others. And I think that has, insofar as for myself, being a Canadian-born Chinese, is that trying to bridge different cultures, bridge different demographics, races, gender, etc. That is something that I just find generally personally very interesting. But if we don't mind, before we wrap up the session, I'd love to ask one more or address one question, and this is actually for Joy, if you don't mind, is that one of the attendees asked, there is a perspective that Asian women are often expected to be subservient, like being expected to set up and clean up after a meeting, and that are otherwise not heard during the meeting. So otherwise, in terms of like giving back and all that, like wouldn't volunteering for these types of little tasks and creating value potentially reinforce some of those, if you want to say stereotypes and issues? When I see the attendees' perspective is that you're creating value for everyone here, right? By doing some of those services to others. But then, there's the stereotype as well.
Yeah, I think that the key then is to do the chair arranging, the napkin setting out, but then also to do the other things, right? To not be quiet, to do those things, and that gets you the foot in the door, but then also look for ways to contribute value in a higher order way. That's sort of like, being the pickleball admin is really not a very, it's a pretty menial job. It's, it's like whatever, not a very high level job. But then when the opportunity presented, or the opportunity or the need arose, so it's really about addressing needs. You start out maybe on a lower level, but identifying where there are greater needs and to serve those as well.
Love it. Low level needs, but they're also high impact needs as well that you can service in those types of opportunities. We're coming up on the hour, and I just see Peter going off mute. But I'd maybe like to quickly thank all the attendees for joining this afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and thank you so much to our panelists, Joy and Brian. Thank you. And while I pass it off to Peter for any ending remarks.
Yeah, my last comment is just I want to thank Allister for your moderating, and also both Joy and Brian for doing a terrific job in providing. Actually, what I thought was really good was that you weren't just doing the same old, right? And I think a lot of these kind of sessions, people just repeat the same old stuff. And I think you had some very unique insights, which I think hopefully the audience really appreciated. I just want to end by saying to all of you, there were a lot of people saying, is this recorded, so forth? Yes, this is recorded. It's going to be on the committee website, Committee 100 website in the next couple of days. But in fact, all of the events have been recorded. So if you want to hear about why Indian Americans succeed better than East Asians, or whatever it may be, or millennials talking about what it's like to be millennials, go to the Committee 100 website, and the recordings are there. But I also want to encourage you that to attend the next two events, one of which is if you're involved with technology, the one on technology careers, I think will be very useful. And it's different in the sense that it's a virtual interaction. So you're going to be talking to people, listening to people, going to, electronic tables and sitting with people. So it's a really unique kind of experience. And the other is on June 11th, we're going to have the first Committee 100 conversations with the two of the co-founders of Committee 100 about why they formed Committee 100 and what we've been able to do. So with that, I want to thank everyone and look forward to seeing all of you at our next session.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Peter.